Welcome to the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast.
Well, then Perez has got the better of it, and he looks to get the better of Schmeichel, and he's done it. Selhurst going to fall here for Alexis. Henri, chance, goal!
This is me and Lean from arsenalvision.co.uk. And welcome back to the podcast. 3 points is 3 points is 3 points, and it's still 3 points, as the saying goes. And in today's show, James, Elliot and Paul will be discussing our victory at Crystal Palace. Not much to say on the game from my point of view. We got to go early, and we sat back and counter-attacked, really. They didn't really cause many problems for us, at least on our goal, until injury time, and that sort of speaks volumes of the game. People see the game in different ways, and I don't think David Ospina had many saves at all to make during the game. What he did do during the game, I wasn't totally certain, must admit, but that's for another day. 3 points, and we are third in the table, thanks to Swansea beating Manchester United. Yeah, it's been a decent weekend for us. I'm going to let the guys go into more detail. So, back again after Monaco. Enjoy the podcast.
Fresh off a punishing trip to Las Vegas, I am your deeply hungover host of today's Arsenal Vision post-match podcast, Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter at Yankee Gunner, but then you'd miss all the fun things I'm going to tell you about this crazy trip to Vegas online. So that's what we call a teaser, folks. I am joined by, hopefully, two more coherent gentlemen. They usually are, so why should today be any different? The first of them is James. You can find him on Twitter at GoonerFanatic49, or just type in any string of letters and numbers and you'll probably get to him eventually. James, hello.
Hello.
Hello. You were at Selhurst yesterday?
I was indeed. I eventually made it there.
Well,
in what was a whirlwind of a trip.
Well,
but yes.
I want to hear all the details about it, but I would be remiss in my duties if I did not at least bring Poznan in my pants. That's not what I'm going to bring. I'm going to bring Paul into the pod. You can follow him on Twitter at Poznan in my pants. I didn't want to give you the wrong idea, like I'm going to bring something from my pants into the podcast. I'm not doing that since the last time when it went poorly. So, Paul, welcome.
Woo!
Yeah, there it is. Emphatic. Yeah. We got a lot of stuff to talk about. We got to talk about a game that we made more interesting than it probably needed to be. We got to talk a little bit of Champions League preview because, as anybody knows, I am deeply and profoundly amorous of the Champions League. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But first, let's start, James, just by hearing a retelling of your away day. Just maybe the highlights, lowlights, traveling tips, anyone who tried to beat you up or you beat them up or got hit with a bottle or held up a banner, anything from your trip to Selhurst Park?
Unfortunately, there was nothing quite as exciting as that took place, although it was a manic sort of trip over to get to the stadium in time, since I received a message at about 2 hours and 15 minutes prior to kickoff. And I'm based a good 2 hours away from the stadium, let alone being able to pick up the tickets prior to going off to Selhurst Park. But anyway, I managed to somehow make it to the game 15 minutes in, albeit, and witness what was a thrilling, riveting tie in a very soulful, as Wenger put it, old ground, and had an absolute whale of a time.
And the support sounded pretty raucous for both sides from the iPad that I watched the game on while still drunk at 7 a.m. Vegas time. Was it as raucous as it sounded?
You know what? I mean, the away fans, although I've only been to a couple of away games now, the away fans are always fantastic, especially in a stadium like that. And surprisingly, the away stand actually makes up about an eighth of the ground, so there's quite a significant portion of away fans there relative to the Palace fans. Mm-hmm. And I'll be honest with you, I was quite surprised because I watched Match of the Day earlier today, in fact, and the commentators made it sound as though Palace was really rocking. I think it might have been to do with where the cameras were situated, and there was a corner section of the stadium that had quite an exuberant set of fans. But for the most part, Palace was surprisingly quiet, in fact. Mm-hmm. And I know on the TV it didn't sound quite like that, but the away fans very much dominated the atmosphere. The problem really was, especially sort of into the second half, the way in which we let them get into the game kind of softened to a certain degree the level of noise from our section and allowed the Palace fans to get into the game slightly more. But given my anticipation and expectation of the ground itself, it actually wasn't quite as raucous as you put it. as I would have expected. But still, a fantastic venue to attend.
Well,
and given the small sort of old terrace-esque vibe to the stadium, it still carried plenty of noise and atmosphere.
Well, I'm glad you made it. I think it's always nice to go see the Arsenal win, so that's good. You guys sounded fantastic. From where I was sat or laying, not feeling fantastic myself. But while the support may have softened in the second half, this podcast will do nothing but stiffen your resolve and excitement for the Arsenal. We've got a lot of titillating discussion to have, so let's dive into it. The starting 11 was one that I think you could suggest right now maybe is Arsenal's preferred 11. Certainly, I guess if Bellerin were fit, you'd see Bellerin starting ahead of Callum Chambers, but otherwise it seemed to be the preferred 11. Paul, let's just start with you with the lineup. Any curiosities about the lineup? Did he set it up sort of the way you expected? Were you thinking that maybe Theo would come in, or was that pretty much what you thought before it was announced?
Yeah, no, I think the lineup was very much as expected based on who was fit and who wasn't. So, no real surprises there. The personnel were as expected. The layout was as expected. I think the game went into a familiar pattern of us defending and taking our chances on the counter-attack, but I'm not sure that's necessarily, some games that's the way we fall into it, and other games that's how we show up to play. I don't think this was one we necessarily showed up to play like this, but we kind of fell into our comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just generally we played in terms of structure the way we had expected to play. I thought, I guess my feeling on the game was it came down to probably the thing that was predicted, but I was surprised to the degree of it was just how much it came down to their wing play against our full-backs, particularly Zaha on the right, who fortunately is good at beating people, but not very good at putting in a final ball. And I think if you look at who created the chances and opportunities, it was a classic counter-attacking game where the quality of our opportunities was superior to the quantity of theirs.
I think that's fair to say. Although they were having success right from the start of the match, they seemed to be having success down the right, where Monreal maybe wasn't having the best game, or maybe was just being left exposed by Alexis. James, were you surprised to see how vulnerable we looked down Monreal's side, which has sort of been the more reliable side for us defensively of late? What do you think? What do you think was the reason for their success down our left, their right?
Well, I'll be honest with you. First of all, I did miss the first 15 minutes of the game.
Okay, so Paul, what did you think? But speculate for us nonetheless. Imagine a game where we were getting tormented down our left flank.
Sure. I'll be honest with you. I mean, listen, from where I sat, I thought we conceded quite a lot of space out wide. Given how essentially we defended, we were quite compact in the middle of the park. I think it was but in doing so, we allowed several crosses, not only from the right, but from the left, especially from the left when Balassi came on. He caused Callum all sorts of problems. And from from sort of the 17th minute onwards, when I thought Nacho had a pretty solid game for the most part. I know that we did concede a lot of space and possession to Zaha, but a lot of times in situations in which we were well covered in the box, Nacho was somewhat blocking off his man, putting Zaha under pressure, and I don't think he was ever really caught out that much. And there were a few times actually when I found my heart in my mouth was I think it was often Zaha picking up quite deep inside the box. There was there was a lot of sort of bouncing around in the box. Sort of it felt like there were pretty good opportunities that could be just sort of only a moment away for Palace. But I did think in those situations Nacho dealt with them fairly well in those kind of last ditch blocks and clearing out for corners. So I don't know if Nacho in particular had a particularly terrible game. I do think that part of the plan was to allow, perhaps not allow isn't the right word, but certainly to concede space out wide and keep the central areas compact. And although Palace, they dominated a lot of the game, certainly from a possession standpoint, and certainly from the standpoint of flinging balls into the box, but the actual amount of good opportunities that they created up until the last 2 minutes were very slim. Outside of the Gale header, and a couple of just scary moments of the ball bouncing around in the box, I don't really remember them having a particularly clear-cut opportunity until the 93rd. So I think that might have been part of the defensive plan, although it certainly did make it tough viewing at times, given how much pressure we were under.
I think if they had been more eager to get crosses in or been better crossing, it could have blown up. But frankly, the delivery from good wide positions, notably from... who would it have been? I guess Zaha, who was just roasting Monreal. The delivery wasn't great. Paul, any thoughts on the vulnerability we saw down our left flank?
Yeah, I agree with you in large part there. I think Monreal did get roasted down that right. I think we might have given him more support had we not been so dominant when those balls were coming in. I think we saw the difference when Murray came in for Fraser Campbell. I mean, Campbell's a really good player, but we were ready for him. Our two centre backs had it well covered in the middle, completely outsized and out-muscled him, and everything changed when Murray came on and they had a real target man. I think Palace obviously weren't set up to go 1-0 down so early, though they should have known, given that we always go 1-0 up somewhere in the first 30 minutes these days.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that as well.
Yeah. So I think the early goal, as always, changed everything. And although we were getting roasted on Monreal's wing, they really weren't getting to grips with us in the centre till, yes, Balassi on the left, but really Murray was the one who started to. That was when they started winning the balls in the box, when Murray came on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and it is a trend you brought up that I wanted to talk about right now. So, you know what? Let's talk about it right now. We've been scoring first and early regularly now. I mean, I think it's 7 games in a row where we've had the first goal, and we've had it in the first half and early in the first half. And, I mean, I know we didn't win at Spurs, but obviously it's a good tactic to score. Scoring goals is a good tactic generally, but I think scoring goals as early as possible, as many of them too, if you can, is great. So kudos to them for thinking of that. But James, other than the obvious and facetious point that scoring goals is a good thing, what's your thought process behind why we've been so successful early in matches? I mean, do you think it's just sort of a happy accident, or do you think there's something about the way we're playing that's leading to this glut of early opening goals?
I think it comes down to a couple of things, and it is, as you say, a fantastic tactic that has been employed, scoring early in a game.
You know what is a great complementary tactic to that, by the way?
Scoring a second?
Well, not conceding any.
Not conceding
any. Yeah.
Well,
I knew that.
All three of them are preferable, yes.
There'll be a test at the end of this, by the way. So.
Good, I look forward to it. Okay. Well, look, I mean, Wenger actually alluded to it. I think it was in the press conference before the game, and he talked about how a lot of it comes down to the confidence that's growing in the team. And I think, given the way that we're playing at the moment, there are several games which we've, whether by, whether it's been purposely practiced to concede as much possession as we are in some of these away games, but we're playing a more counter-attacking brand of football, especially away from home. And in doing so, we're not creating perhaps the number of opportunities that we've created in the past when we've tried to retain much larger portions of the possession, but instead we're creating much higher quality opportunities. So throughout a match, the chances that we are creating more often than not, we seem to be putting away, given the types of chances that we tend to fashion out. And I think that comes down to perhaps the growing understanding to a certain degree of some of the forward players now that, for example, Giroud's had a pretty steady run in the team, having previously been out for a few months. It's sort of stabilizing the front four a little more, especially with Santi now having played a central role for a decent period of time now. There's not as much chopping and changing going on, and I think that forward line is complementing each other rather well. especially given both the counter-attacking style that we've seemed to adopt away, and also the heavy retention of possession for the most part at home. Mm-hmm. And I think compared to seasons prior, especially for example, you can see it with Olivier, for example, we seem a lot more clinical, and when we're given those chances early on in games, we seem to be putting them away. And the most obvious counter example to that is the Chelsea away game last season, where Giroud had that chance within 2 minutes and scuffed a shot. Whereas now you just feel like chances early on, especially early on in games, we seem to take them and try and grab the game by the scruff of the neck.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely what we're not seeing anymore is the soporific, just avalanche of lateral passes in the opposition half that not only could bore you to tears, but also is very easy to sort of stay organized and keep your shape and keep that at bay. Now we're getting into more opportunities where players like Alexis and Welbeck can run at defenses. Giroud can do whatever the thing he calls it when his legs move incredibly slow, one after the other. I guess you could call it running, walking. I don't know, power walking, whatever he wants to call it. Oh, you know what? He's fantastic, but he's slow. Come on, you know what? Leave me that. It's all I have left. The only thing I have left with him is that he's slow. Okay.
You know what? He's actually not. I'm being honest here, Elliot. I don't think he's not a quick guy. He's not the nimblest of players.
He's so slow.
I really don't think he's as slow as you make him out to be.
I've seen goalkeepers beat him to a ball.
Jesus, he's slow.
He's really slow.
Listen.
To be fair to
acceleration is particularly slow. But once he gets going, he's not. He can match plenty of defenders in the league. I think there was a period in the game.
Yes, I think he can match Rio Ferdinand in a sprint. You're right. Now, I'm going to let Paul speak, despite the fact that the opening phrase was "to be fair to Giroud." But go ahead.
Look, I think if you look at him, gears 1 through 4 are awful. It's like a tractor moving forward. Gears 5 and 6, he's all right. If you're counter-attacking and he's running box to box, he can pretty much gallop with the best of them. Unfortunately, most of that speed work for a striker, for an attacker, is those first 2-3 yards. After that, it doesn't really matter much. I mean, how often is Theo really running flat out? It's what he does in his first 3 or 4. That's where his speed comes in.
You know who's explosively quick like that too is Welbeck. It always shocks me. He takes that one touch to get the ball out of his feet, and then he's by the defender in a blink. And since we're talking about Danny Welbeck, let's talk about the opening goal. It's great energy and endeavor and work rate from Welbeck that gets us that goal, because he obviously nicks the ball off the defender, then beats him for pace and gets fouled for Cazorla to convert the penalty. There's a couple things here. The one thing we did see when Alexis and Welbeck were not in the side, as much as I am a fan of Theo and a fan of Ozil and players like that, we didn't have the energetic pressing in the opposition half, and we didn't have that work rate, and we've seen so many goals come from unforced errors by the opposition due to that kind of work rate that we get with Welbeck, Alexis, and Oxlade-Chamberlain's another player like that who we haven't had. First of all, Paul, give me just your quick thoughts on Welbeck's play there to get the penalty, and also if you think that kind of play is the specific reason why he's keeping Theo out of the side.
Yeah, I do. I think Theo's been talking a really good game about what it takes to play in this team now in terms of defensive work and work rate and all that kind of thing. But Welbeck's delivering it. And, it's a little harsh on Theo because he hasn't really got much of a look in since he's come back. He came back quicker or sooner than Welbeck, but I guess Welbeck's been out a shorter period of time. Mm-hmm. But overall, this last run of games, I understand why Welbeck's been picked. They suit him a little bit more in terms of his natural game. And if you look at why you'd want Theo on the pitch, you'd want him on because a couple of times a game he may really impact things with either an assist or near assist or whatever. But Welbeck's been doing that. I mean, he basically had 2 assists in this game. I don't think Welbeck's playing anywhere near the top of his potential. It's just his ordinary game is very impactful. And I think it was the first goal, the penalty he created where it was his, if you like, his interception, his proactiveness, his front-footedness that we've seen so often. It was us pressing them that made that turnover situation, and turnovers are deadly, especially against a team that's pressing up the other end of the pitch. So, absolutely full marks. 75% of the credit for that goal goes to him, and a cool finish from Santi.
And what a difference it makes away to a side near the bottom than the top, near the bottom, because that's a game that if you do fall behind, then they're just going to pack it in, play defensively, try to hit you on the counter, and suddenly you're in a situation where it's going to be really difficult to break them down. But you have to think, Paul, that getting that goal early, we probably could have done more with it, but it certainly tilted the balance of play heavily in our favor at that point.
It did. I think it changed everything. And you can't look at this game without the context of the weekend and all the other results, nor can you look at it without taking into account a Monaco game coming up in Wednesday, where somebody like Sir Alex Ferguson, God bless him, would be rotating, players in and out depending on what the game. Well, we go with pretty much our best 11, whatever that may be. There might be a change or two on I think it's Wednesday, against Monaco. But the beauty of yesterday's performance is that for 91 and a half minutes, we were ahead, or felt like we were ahead from whatever that was, the 17th minute. I'm not sure when the first goal was, but early on, we score a goal, we go 2 up. We kind of coasted maybe a bit too much in the second half. But while we might be physically tired after that game, mentally, it was only the last 2 or 3 minutes that were frenetic. And the chances, at the end of the day, you lose games out of tiredness because of mental tiredness, not physical tiredness, if you ask me. So I think it was huge yesterday going ahead, and it'll be huge for the Monaco game that we went ahead early yesterday.
It'll be interesting. We'll talk about the Monaco game down the road a little bit, but I thought the fact that Theo didn't get in at all against Palace made me wonder if maybe the manager's going to start him against Monaco, but we'll get to that. James, one of the things the reality is we did get a 2-0 lead, and we probably should have made the game a little more comfortable. We'll talk about the second goal in a moment, but we definitely didn't have it all our way. We were conceding a lot of opportunities. We made an absolute mountain of clearances in the game, more than what we usually make in 3 or 4 games combined. But one of the things that I think you're starting to see now is the impact of not having Arteta and his 92, 93% passing in midfield. When we get pressed in midfield now, you have Cazorla and Coughlin in the center who aren't necessarily as good when it comes to pass accuracy as an Arteta. And I think we're starting to see that's maybe a reason for why the midfield pressure against us has been more effective. Once again, against Crystal Palace, Cazorla completed only 77% of his passes, Coughlin 74%. That's very low for Arsenal midfielders, and that means that you're more affected by pressure in the midfield. So do you think, James, that we're starting to see the challenge of not having that metronomic passing from Arteta in midfield? And Coughlin, again, just to give him a little bit of credit really quickly, he did have a fantastic defensive contribution, 5 tackles, 6 interceptions, 7 clearances, a blocked shot, a couple of fouls, and he lived on a yellow card most of the game and still managed to walk that, I thought, tightrope pretty well. But do you think that by having 2 guys in the deeper part of midfield now who aren't the most accurate with their passing, we are seeing a little bit of difficulty handling midfield pressure because of that?
I do, and it's for that reason that I'm personally phoning for a better defensive midfielder to be brought in, because as much as we can talk about the lack of the metronomic passing that Arteta brings, as soon as you put him in that team, you're probably having to replace Coquelin, or maybe, I don't know if you want to fit him in alongside Coquelin in the Ramsey role and then push Cazorla to the 10. But if you do so, I think the qualities that Arteta lacks are actually far more detrimental to the team as a whole, given the qualities that Coquelin brings to the side. Because once you take out Coquelin, sure, perhaps the ability to regurgitate possession, especially against the high pressure teams, becomes improves with Arteta on the side, but for that, then you lack the athleticism, the physicality that Coquelin brings, and even that in itself naturally brings on further pressure as well. So it's a bit of a balancing act. And quite frankly, when we've had Arteta in the side against teams away from home that have pressed us heavily, it's not like we've looked much better. In fact, I'm pretty sure Arteta was present in both the Liverpool and the Chelsea games.
Well, the Dortmund game comes to mind.
And the Dortmund game this season, the problem is with that high press, it's high energy. There's lots of pace in those types of teams, which Arteta struggles against. And frankly, it's perhaps his passing accuracy is extremely high in those types of games too. But in these particular away games, when teams try and adopt this high press, just naturally the passing accuracy, however good a player is going to be lower than the average for the season, just because it's that much more difficult to complete your pass. And Coquelin's not great necessarily with the ball at his feet and making those passes, but I certainly don't think he's as bad as people make him out to be. And he even said in an interview recently that when asked, what is his favourite training session, and he said it's actually, this will surprise you, but it's actually sort of the one-touch passing games that we play in the.
He may want to attend that. He may want to attend that session more often then.
Sure. Okay. fair enough. But listen, I think sometimes it's a little bit of confirmation bias that you tend to associate a particular flaw with a player and it gets slightly exaggerated, which I think is somewhat the case with Coquelin. But I hasten to add that I don't think he's particularly great at it, but I don't think it's quite as big a flaw as someone will make it out to be. But going back to your original question, I do agree that yes, the metronomic qualities that Arteta brings in those games would aid the team to a certain degree, but given his deficiencies, and I dare to think if he's lost coming back from an injury now, he's not getting any younger. How much longer he has left in those legs of his. And I'm not
suggesting, just real quick, James, I'm not suggesting he's the answer. My point was more the larger point that just do we miss having someone who's a little bit quicker of thought and when it comes to passing the ball in midfield and a little more accurate. And here's what I see. And Paul, maybe you can tell me if I'm seeing this wrong or if you think it's something else or if this is exactly what you're seeing as well. Typically, we have the two deeper midfielders, both of whom are comfortable receiving the ball from the back four, carrying the ball forward into an attacking position, and passing the ball comfortably, confidently, and accurately from a deeper midfield position. Coquelin now, unlike Arteta, the back four don't seem to want to give him the ball to start attacks as much. They don't want to seem to give him the ball as an out ball from defense. So it's depending more on either players coming back from further up the pitch, which reduces, obviously, the way we're stretching the field, or Cazorla's got to come back and do sort of that job for both of them. Do you think that with Coquelin in there, as great as he is defensively, and I think he's done a brilliant job, we have sort of one less out option to build from the back? Or do you think I've just totally misread that and I'm seeing sort of, to James's point, confirmation bias of my own opinion?
Okay, so I think it's going to be one of those times going to tell things, but I think I've almost got a third view, which is I think Coquelin did really well with his passing yesterday. Even if you compare Coquelin and Santi's passing percentages as being kind of both a little shaky, when I look at the actual performances and where those passes went, I can't fault anything Coquelin did with the ball. When he had a pass that wasn't completed, it was generally because there was nothing upfield for him. Santi was untidy again with a player that you'd think with his skills and abilities would be able to find that pass. And for me, Santi was the one who had an out ball and still managed to fluff it. And we've seen this in a few games now where he's kind of disappeared. And the problem with Santi disappearing in midfield is he doesn't have the kind of physical presence and the athleticism that if the game's choppy and it's not flowing and it's not working for him, he can still impress in a game. And for a game like yesterday, a derby that was going to be choppy and messy and a battle in midfield, I'd far prefer to see Arteta and Coquelin. And for the reasons you outlined there, I think I know we think that's not going to be the greatest option necessarily in terms of a progressive game of play. But Arteta's metronomic passing that you talked about is so underrated. People keep talking about how he doesn't, he's not aggressive enough. He doesn't play it forward. But that's where the flow comes from. Coquelin, I think, I was highly critical of him the first 3 or 4 games in terms of passing, realizing he was just getting back into the team.
Right.
His easy passes were going all over the place. And that's a little bit of what we're seeing with Santi, where it's not flowing with him. Maybe not easy passes, but for Santi, relatively easy passes are not connecting. I didn't see Coquelin do much wrong yesterday in terms of passing. I thought it was very, very good under pressure. Of the 2 players, he was the one who was typically in a more pressurized situation with fewer options out. I'm looking forward to seeing Arteta and Coquelin in a derby-type game with Arteta's control and coolness and Coquelin being able to impress on the midfield and still being a pretty... To me, he's getting stronger and stronger in the other parts of his game. I'm actually really liking what he's doing.
Yeah, and by the way, my larger point there wasn't necessarily one that was being critical of him, but just that I think, when Mertesacker or Koscielny have the ball and they look up for what's ahead of them, I don't think Coquelin is the option. You see Arteta, you're going to give him the ball, he's going to give it back to someone else, and he's going to do that successfully. I think with Coquelin, they're maybe a little bit more reticent to give him that responsibility. It wasn't necessarily because he's not capable of doing it, but certainly it's not as much of his forte as it is with Arteta. Let's do this, though. It was a win, and there were a lot of positives to take from it. So moving from sort of maybe the weaker aspects of how the midfield's working to what really has been working, Mesut Ozil is just brilliant. He's just brilliant. He's brilliant to watch, and since he's come back, he's been sensational. I think the issue we're seeing now is when he has played, quote-unquote, on the left, we know he's drifted central. But no matter how pedantic you want to be, the fact is when he started from a central position, like he did again against Crystal Palace, he's been imperious. So many great moments from the match yesterday from Ozil, but the one that stands out, obviously, is that counterattack where he received the ball, drew the defender close to him, kicked it into space, chased it down, slide rule pass for Alexis, who unfortunately didn't get on the score sheet, and it would have been nice for him to get back into scoring from there. But talk to me a little bit, James, about Ozil's performance yesterday, and if it is also directly related to him getting that number 10 position and making it his own, or is it just that his form is improving generally?
Well, I mean, Ozil was excellent in parts of that game, and I can't, for the life of me, and fortunately so, I can't get the image of that, or just the sort of picture frame, or video frame even, of Ozil controlling that ball, flicking it over the defender's head, surging forward, and then waiting for the perfect moment to just exquisitely play the ball through into Sanchez's path and create that chance for the potential to go 3-0 up. I mean, it was absolutely fantastic to watch. And, sometimes that's all it takes in a game, is that world class, that moment of class and excellence to turn a game on its head. And that was excellent to watch. And to your point, I do agree that since he's come into the 10 role, he has looked an improved player. I think that's down to a couple of things. It's partly down to the fact, as we mentioned on the previous part, is he looks a lot more confident, a lot physically stronger, etc., etc. And yes, that part of that comes down to the position he's in, but directly as a result of him moving to number 10, what it actually allows us to do is it allows us to play 2 fast players in those equivalent positions, as in left wing forward and right wing forward, and having 2 of those types of players that are able to make the kind of runs that Ozil looks for is what really complements his game. And it's not, I don't think it's so much a case of him being out on the left or being out centrally, because he does just naturally drift anyway, and you tend to see him pick up the ball in wide situations and wide areas of the pitch. But the key really is by playing him out on the left, it often means that you have an equivalent player on the field in the 10 role who isn't making the runs in behind that Ozil's looking for, or doesn't have the type of movement that complements Ozil's game quite as well as it does when you have both a Welbeck and an Alexis on the right and the left, creating danger on both sides of the field, or whether it be a Walcott and an Alexis, or even a Chamberlain and an Alexis. And that, those are the types of players that that go so well with what Ozil brings to the side, and I think that in itself is what has come together during this kind of rich vein of form that Ozil's in, and I don't think it's any coincidence.
Yeah, it's certainly fantastic to see, and one thing that we should point out too, since I was being a little bit critical of Coughlin and Cazorla's handling of the ball in midfield, the pitch was an act of vandalism on the game of football. It was just horrendous. It was a cow pasture. So,
I think we've done really well not to talk about the pitch, because at the end of the game, that was the strongest impression for me. The pitch dominated everything.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, when I arrived, I thought I thought I might have arrived at Bradford. I wasn't quite sure where I was.
Yeah, I mean it was terrible, and it wouldn't surprise me if some of that was intentional on Pardew's part. Which, fair play to him, but it didn't work, so he can go fuck himself. But ultimately, we did get a second goal through Olivier Giroud, and Paul. I mean, it was more great play from Welbeck. He made a really intelligent run. The pass from Sanchez was perfect. He put his shot on target, which is what you need to do from those wide positions. All too often you'll see a player screw that shot, past the near post, out in a touch. And by putting it on target, keeper parried, maybe could have done better, but Giroud was there to stab home. Obviously, Giroud has been a revelation over the last month or so. And the single biggest criticism I think you could make about Olivier Giroud in seasons past, his lack of pace aside, is conversion percentage. That's really the problem. If you're not able to run past players and wreak havoc with your pace, then you need to be able to, convert, because pacey players, dribbly players like Alexis, for example, or Theo, I think they just get more opportunities to scare defenders. And I think if you're a little slower and you're not going to beat players off the dribble and beat players with pace, then when the ball does fall to you, you have to be clinical. He's really doing that. Paul, is there anything you see in his game that would explain why he's more clinical? Is he getting into better positions? Is it movement, or is it just confidence?
I think it starts with confidence. We're definitely talking about Giroud 2.0. I mean, I was always a Giroud supporter, but he's come back a lot better than Giroud 1.0. I was defending him in his off time as, along with many others, saying, we're being too harsh on him. He was always only a great plan B. It's not his fault we didn't sign a plan A striker. You remember all those dialogues on Twitter? Well,
I've probably started a lot of them.
Yeah, he's a pretty good plan A. So, although I'm a big Giroud supporter, I really didn't do him justice. I think even Arsene might be surprised he's turned out this, because I think there's a lot of confidence to it. But I also think the kinds of opportunities he's getting lately are the ones where he was always pretty good. It's a lot more in that, in the box near the 6-yard area. I think Welbeck did great, parrying a shot, not only on target, but across the goal where it's going to get parried back. I mean, he could have parried it near post, as you mentioned, and we would have got nothing out of it. I think we're getting, the previous game where he got 2 goals were both kind of near post run-ons. Those kinds of flicks and near post run-ons are his strength. So I think we're doing better serving him. If you go back to the times when we were most critical of him, we were also most critical of Ozil, and the same thing applied to both of them. We didn't have runners in behind. We didn't have runners giving their defenders conniptions, which is exactly what Welbeck does, what Walcott will be doing, what Bellerin is contributing. So I think the nature of our play has changed, which to a way that suits Giroud, where we don't, no offense meant, we don't actually care he's not that fast, because there's 3 other guys on the pitch doing it.
It makes
getting
a big
in behind,
difference.
Getting those balls across.
I mean, think about it. Last season, Theo goes down. We didn't have Welbeck. We didn't have Sanchez. And, I mean, there just was not enough pace in the side. To your point now, that's not a problem whatsoever.
And if I bring us back in our memories, that 2-0 defeat of Bayern Munich over at the Allianz, that first goal, that superb counter-attacking goal by us, Giroud banged that one in the back of the net, and Theo put the classic cross, the square into the box box that he gave RVP so often, and Giroud put it away. I mean, he's always had that in his locker. We just haven't had the Theos and the Welbecks getting behind the defenders, turning them around, and allowing him to make those runs and plant it in the back of the net. I think Giroud 1.0 would have been 1.5 had he had the service he needed.
Yeah. No, that's a fair point. Well, whatever it is, look, opinions of Giroud aside, when your main striker is scoring goals regularly, you should be happy. And I'm thrilled for him, and I'm thrilled for us. James, unless you have something to add on Giroud, I want to talk a little bit about the end of the match and how we made it interesting. You have any final quick thoughts on Giroud, or should we move on?
I mean, I couldn't agree more with what Paul has said. I mean, it certainly didn't take a rocket scientist last season to tell you that if you add more pace in the side, you'll begin to see the better qualities of Giroud shine. But a lot of it also comes down to the fact that we're just a far better attacking unit as well. We create much higher quality of opportunities now, given that we have the likes of a Sanchez in the side and an Ozil who's playing as good as he's probably played for us, or other than perhaps when he first arrived at the club. So all those factors that come together, and also given his, he seems to be a player that works extremely hard off the field, and as his confidence has grown, and his abilities do genuinely seem to have improved over the last 2 seasons. So you throw that all into the mix, and you start to see the kind of results we're seeing now.
Yeah, and look, I mean, 67 touches was third only to Cazorla and Coughlin. He's getting involved. He won 9 aerial duels, so he's providing that outlet ball for the goalkeeper when he kicks long. His hold-up play has always been a strength of his, but it's been excellent lately. 4 shots, 2 on target. I mean, he's active and he's involved, and it seems to be harder and harder to keep him out of a game. And I think that is in part also due to the fact that when you have Welbeck running like crazy on one side and Sanchez, running like crazy on the other side, and twisting defenders inside and out, that's naturally going to just create a lot more space for Giroud. Now, as the game wore on, we got a little sloppier. They made it a little more interesting. They did get a late goal and then hit the post at the end. I don't want to focus too much on what we did wrong in allowing them to score, but I want to address 2 things. First of all, the substitutions. So, Paul, start with you. I don't know how many more times we have to see it to probably come to the conclusion that trying to close the game out and bringing on defenders to protect a slim lead doesn't really suit us, our style, our approach. We get nervy, we have less possession, we invite pressure on us, and we don't seem to be able to play out from it. And that seems to embolden the opposition even more. Did you have a problem with the substitutions, with bringing on Rosicky, Paulista, and Gibbs, or Gabriel, I guess, and Gibbs, as opposed to maybe, fine, bring on Gibbs, but also bring on Theo, do something to maintain that threat? Or are you fine with the approach of just trying to shut the game down?
Well, the first thing I want to say was Gabriel looked totally confused on the sideline when Wenger was using his little fingers to try and persuade him or tell him what he wanted him to do. And, you could imagine Gabriel there seeing Alexis coming off thinking, where does he want me to play?
Well, they said on TV that we were going to a back 5, and I was thinking to myself, we've never played that before, so that should work out really well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking, Gabriel's thinking, he doesn't understand a blind word Wenger's saying in his Portuguese, and he's thinking, we got 2 centre-backs, we got 3 full-backs, what the hell? Alexis is coming off, he wants me to play striker. So anyway, I thought that was pretty funny. So I was almost okay with the substitutions. I think Wenger got it half right and therefore completely wrong, because by taking off Welbeck, he removed the cover for Chambers, who was getting, at that stage we weren't getting roasted by Zaha. Maybe that was partly because Gibbs was on, but Chambers was getting annihilated by Balassi.
Yeah, and you knew Balassi was going to be trouble when he came on.
Yeah, and so I get bringing on Rosicky, you wanted to kind of get a hold of the midfield and stuff, but by pulling off Welbeck, Chambers was just thrown to the wolves. So I could see a logic for what he was doing. I don't really have a problem. I think we've done okay in the past sometimes when we brought on the...
Well...
all the fullbacks. There was one game we had 5 fullbacks on the pitch. So yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I do think when you bring on the fullbacks, it's okay because they can play sort of as wingers, and he just plays them as wingers and then lets them cover the fullbacks so you're not vulnerable wide. But bringing on a third center back, I mean, we really did not seem to have an out ball after that. Ozil had been our most effective possession player. He came off for Rosicky. Then when you take off Welbeck, to your point, you lose some of the endeavor and work rate up front and someone that can still get in behind. By the time Sanchez comes off, there was no one that was really going to threaten to get by the back line of Crystal Palace, so they could really push up the pitch and try to hem us in, which is what they did. What about you, James? I mean, was that the approach that you would have wanted to see us take? Do you think it was just a case of they were always going to put in a good effort in those last few minutes, or do you think we made it easy for them with that tactic?
I think it's a bit of everything, really, in the sense that, I mean, you said it doesn't really suit us to play, say, 5 at the back and, with a 6th defender in Gibbs playing left wing. And while I do completely agree with Paul that the biggest issue really was taking off Welbeck because it left our right side of the defence particularly exposed. And you could see Paulista ended up playing sort of right centre-back. Didn't really know whether he should come out to Balassi once Callum Chambers was beaten, or whether he should stay and sort of try and cover the near post cross. I don't think the 5 of them were particularly in sync in the sense that it doesn't look like it's something that we've practiced particularly extensively as a unit as such. But I do think the idea behind it does make sense. We've seen United sides in the past adopt it quite successfully to close out games. I think part of making a substitution in itself is to run the clock down. And I don't think bringing on like a Theo, for example, would have added anything whatsoever to the team at the time, because we really didn't look like we were going to be dangerous on the counter-attack, especially with Ozil coming off. Mm-hmm. And frankly, I mean, you can look to the Anderlecht game where we brought on Podolski. Was it at 3-0 or at 3-1? And that in itself altered the game extremely negatively.
You could bring on a Jack Wilshere or something and try to have a little more possession in midfield so that.
Yeah, but then you want to throw in a Jack Wilshere who hasn't played for that long into that part of the game. Maybe in theory it would work, but again, he wouldn't have added anything to the defensive side of things out wide, which is where most of the issue was coming from anyway.
True.
It was either Balassi or Zaha beating the fullback, and then it was dealing with that second ball. It was a very good ball in. Ultimately, it was a decent ball in, and it caused a bit of panic in the box, and it was one of those goals. And then after that, the cross from we were on 10 to hooks with just a minute and a half to go, and Balassi whipped in a fantastic cross for Glenn Murray after having had Callum Chambers all ends up. So I mean, listen, I think in theory, I wouldn't be surprised to see it again in tough away games where we need to close out the game, and it's a little nervy. I'd like to think that perhaps it's something we'll, be slightly more prepared for. I get obviously we're not privy to how much of this is actually practiced externally, but like I said, it certainly didn't look like it was something that we were particularly familiar with. Mm. But I think it was against. I could be completely wrong, but I think it might have been against West Ham. But there was a game where Callum Chambers came on and played as a third centre back. We played a back 5. And another fullback was brought on. So it's something that Wenger has done in the past. He does, as Paul said, he sometimes does like to bring on all the fullbacks. Sometimes that's what you've got to do away from home, because you are naturally going to end up soaking up quite a lot of pressure. And to be fair, yes, it could easily have been 2-2, but outside of those 2 chances, which fell in the 93rd, and some seconds, and then literally the 95th minute, we really didn't concede any, particularly that I would necessarily classify as goal-scoring opportunity as such, aside from perhaps that Gale header.
Yeah, but how long was it before your heart restarted?
The funny thing was when Glenn Murray headed that ball, and you know what I will say actually, which I was quite surprised by, there seemed to be an air of arrogance amongst the Arsenal away fans, and by arrogance I mean even right up until that goal that was conceded, even after that, people didn't just. I don't know. I was on edge for large portions of that game because it's Arsenal, and Selhurst Park is not an let's not forget Selhurst Park is not an easy place to go to.
It's a great result and a tough place to go. No taking it away from us,
especially in the context of things, Pardew having come in recently, and they've been on a pretty decent run of form. They're a very quick physical team, and frankly, I was a little aghast as to how quickly. I haven't been to that, many away games at all recently, but I can't imagine that was the type of atmosphere in an equivalent game earlier in the season. Not that we perhaps would have been in that position anyway, closing out the game. But there was just and there's a good side to that. There's clearly a growing confidence, I think, from the fans' point of view in this team. But still, you've got to, especially with this Arsenal side, you've got to be cautious. And look, I don't think it really does have a direct impact on the way that the team performs, because ultimately. Look to the Stoke game, for example. We came back with a fantastic second-half performance after getting sort of a rollicking from a pretty despondent fan base. But still, it seemed to almost be replicated to a certain degree in the second half from the team itself. And I'm not sure if complacency is the right word, but I don't know. Although we soaked up a lot of pressure quite well, we allowed Palace onto us, and I didn't think it was necessarily the right approach, especially straight off in the second half. Like Palace had several corners within a couple of minutes, and I for one was pretty, was biting my nails and fidgety. But there was quite a large number of the crowd that seemed pretty comfortable with the team, which was a little bit of a surprise. But perhaps that is a positive note as well.
You'll be unsurprised to know that I have 3 more items on the list of topics we're supposed to get to, and 4 minutes to get to them. So we're going to find a creative way to do this. Quick hits, that's what we'll call it. Welcome to the quick hits segment of the pod. Paul, is it time for the Ospina experiment to end?
So, not quite, but I was Googling today. I was trying to remember the name of that guy, Rene Higuita, I think he is, who was that famous Colombian goalkeeper who used to do the spider kick, the one where he overhead cartwheeled to clear the ball from Jamie Redknapp in that game against England. The player who thinks Neuer's a pussy because when Neuer comes out, he then passes to one of their centre backs or their full backs and then retreats, whereas Higuita would run up the wing to receive the next ball, play a ball into the middle of midfield, run up. There's a great video of this, then continue running up the wing into the penalty area, along the byline, and draw a penalty. So wow. I think Ospina, yeah, there's 15 minutes of shit Higuita did for Colombia. And I think Ospina began the Higuita transformation yesterday. So it was very entertaining. I mean, for me, Szczesny is the number one goalkeeper, but Ospina is beginning to display his inner Higuita.
Yeah, I mean, I'll put it this way. We'll have a really, really quick Elliot's criticism corner because I know James wanted one. I think it has to be asked what the strategy is with the goalkeeping position right now, because we put a lot of time and energy into Szczesny. He's a homegrown player. He's someone that we've had at the club since he's, a boy. He was our number one going into the season. Yes, we bought Ospina, presumably to push Szczesny because he's always looked better when he's had competition, as we saw with Fabianski last season. But I can't believe that Ospina was brought in to be the number one at the club. To me, he just doesn't look confident enough commanding the area. He flapped quite a bit against Palace. He had that one where we tried to head it at the edge of the box and then went down as if he had hurt himself, when replays show he clearly hadn't had any contact with any part of his body. But I wonder what the strategy is, because if it is a case that Szczesny has just become an intolerable part of the squad and he's bad for the mood around the dressing room, whatever it is, then I understand it. But right now I'm starting to worry that if we stick with Ospina, we're going to start to see us dropping some points. And I do wonder if some of the shaky clearances from the back four that we saw yesterday are in some way due to the fact that we're not seeing the most confident goalkeeping behind them right now. One more topic I want to cover literally in under 60 seconds, and then we're just going to just very, very briefly mention the Champions League because, again, I was supposed to stop 30 seconds ago. So, just really quickly, James, in, 5 sentences or less, are you worried with Jack Wilshere coming back that the manager is going to try to find place for him and it will upset the rhythm and form and confidence that we've started to build, or do you think the manager will just find a way to work him back in if he can?
Not particularly. I think it's going to be difficult to see how Jack's going to get into the side and get the required minutes. But there's so many games coming up that naturally, especially given the one position that's still, in my eyes, a little up in the air, is that kind of Ramsey role, which I think Wilshere could slot into at times. I think there'll be opportunities that will arise, but Wenger's not the kind of manager that makes decisions if he knows that it will potentially hamper the landscape of the team. Let's not forget when we were struggling with Jack in the side and trying to sort of shoehorn both Jack and Ramsey in, there were several issues throughout the team that were taking place, and I think now there were various factors involved in that, and it was certainly a long-term plan at the time from Wenger's point of view to try and get that 4-1-4-1 to work certainly smoother than it was. And I think the 4-1-4-1 is something that we've adopted a lot better recently, and perhaps it will now be an easier team for Jack to slot back into. But how long it will take for him to get back to fitness is another question entirely, and that's going to be one of the biggest or toughest challenges for Wenger over the coming weeks.
I don't know. I mean, Paul, he's always seemed really, really, really loyal to Jack and determined to make him a regular starter. I mean, he just seems to have oceans of belief in him. He's a stubborn manager. We know that. I don't think that Ozil on the left in a 4-1-4-1 was just some fad thing he was trying, and we know he doesn't like to back down from his ideas. Do you see Jack coming back into the squad, playing next to Coquelin with Cazorla ahead of them, or vice versa, and Ozil back out wide in the 4-1-4-1, or just really quickly, do you think he'll just stick with what's been working and Jack will have to fight for his place like everybody else?
The latter. While I agree with your overall thesis, this is the business end of the season. Wenger becomes much more pragmatic. We have a reasonable chance to go deep in the Champions League. So on the one hand, we're going to have lots of games for Jack to get a look in, but I think he will be introduced based on merit and minutes rather than philosophy or vision, given where we're at. So I think it'll be dictated by injuries. He'll be coming back for the Ramsey position, but so will Ramsey, and Ramsey is the better player to play the Ramsey position right now. So by the time Jack's ready and an opening might be there, Ramsey may well be back. So I think Jack's going to have to be very patient for the end of this season. Yeah.
No, and I think if this really is a meritocracy, then that's how it should be. So since we got to basically wrap up, just in closing, Champions League's back on Wednesday, home to Monaco. Would be great to, put the tie to bed if we can, get a comfortable win and a clean sheet in the first leg. I'm not saying that's what will necessarily happen, but that would be great. Obviously, this is the Captain Obvious corner of the pod. In 30 seconds or less, do you expect to see the same starting 11 we saw at Palace, James? And what's your score prediction for Wednesday?
I think so. Maybe Bellerin comes in for Chambers, and I've been playing in my mind whether Theo comes in for Welbeck or not. I'm not entirely sure. I do think Wenger prefers Welbeck in that position, but maybe this is the type of game at home where he sees Theo can make a difference. Either way, I think the team will be pretty much the same aside from perhaps those two positions, and I'm pretty confident, extremely excited for another Champions League night. Can't wait for this knockout competition to get up and rolling, and really feeling good about our chances of progressing to the next round.
Yeah, me too. I love the Champions League. Paul, same 11 at Selhurst Park. Any changes you see, and what do you expect?
Yeah, I think the interesting positions will be the Walcott, Welbeck position, the Bellerin. Is Bellerin back and fit? And maybe the one other big decision is Gibbs versus Monreal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially with Monreal maybe looking a little shaky. specifically against Zaha, against Crystal Palace, but we shall see. I got to thank you both and anyone who listens to this for putting up with my booze-addled brain today. I certainly hope to be in finer fettle for Wednesday's post-match pod, when we hopefully are celebrating a big victory with one foot in the quarterfinals. So, as always, you're going to want to follow these gentlemen on Twitter. James can be found at GoonerFanatic49. James, as always, thanks for talking Arsenal with me and Paul.
Yes, thank you both.
Yes.
A delight as always, a pleasure, fantastic, wonderful, exhilarating, titillating, all of the above.
All those and more. And Paul, you're going to want to follow him at Posnan in my pants on Twitter. Paul, as always, a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yep, my name is Elliot Smith. You can follow me, unfollow me, block me, or abuse me on Twitter at Yankee Gunner. We will be talking to you again after the Champions League Wednesday, so hopefully some good results around the Champions League and a big win for Arsenal. Until then, thanks for listening. Cheers and goodbye.
Woo!